In this video, we will be finishing up our walkthrough of the 2014 AP Biology free response questions. Question 5. Genetically modified crops have been developed that produce a protein that makes the plants resistant to insect pests. Other genetic modifications make the crops more resistant to chemicals that kill plants, herbicides. Part A. Describe two potential biological risks of large-scale cultivation and use of such genetically modified plants. Part B. For each of the risks you described in Part A, propose a practical approach for reducing the risk. So one possible risk that we can find is it's pretty similar to another big issue that is in the field of medicine, which is bacterial resistance. And basically, when bacteria are overexposed to an antibiotic, they through a natural selection and random mutations and the fact that they multiply very quickly, they eventually develop resistance for that antibiotic. And similarly, the insects that eat these plants might develop a resistance to the plants. It will take a lot longer because insects reproduce much slower than bacteria do, but there will it's very likely that we'll have resistant individuals showing up. So just through a random mutation and pure chance, and because this will make them more successful, they'll eventually take over and outcompete the individuals that are not resistant to the chemicals that kill them or the protein that the plants produce. And another thing is that if the insects do not develop resistance, or if many species prey on these plants and not all of them develop resistance, then there's going to be some reduction in the insect population because they don't have enough food to eat, or they don't have enough food as they normally would. And this is going to cause a drop in the insect population, and in general, this is going to make a pretty big impact on the food chain because insects are a food source for a lot of organisms that are higher up on the chain, the food web, I mean. These are not the only answers. There are other things you can say, like, for example, the pesticides could go into the environment, or you can have a loss of like pollinators and insects that are actually beneficial to whoever is growing the crops. Okay, but we're going to go with these two risks that we listed here, and now we're going to propose a practical approach for reducing the risk. So for risk number 1, insects that are resistant to the protein will become more widespread, and they'll eventually take over. So one thing you could do to mitigate the spread of resistant insects, or just slow the rate at which resistant insects are going to start to show up, is by rotating the use of GMO and non-GMO crops. Or you could have the plants produce many different proteins that target the insects in different ways. And because of the chance of random mutations targeting all those proteins is going to be very slim, you can ensure that even if an insect is resistant to one of these proteins, it's very unlikely that it will be resistant to the other 2, or 3 or 4, or how many there are. And for consequence 2, one way to mitigate that would be not only using GMO crops, mixing them with other crops, or you can provide wild plants and other food sources for the insects that need those food sources, and other animals that might be eating them. Part 6. Information processing involves complex neural pathways that require a certain amount of time between recognition of a stimulus and the resulting response. For some types of stimuli, a reflex arc replaces the typical stimulus response pathway. A representation of the reflex arc is shown in the figure above. Based on the figure, describe 2 ways that the reflex arc differs from typical stimulus response transmission pathways. Provide reasoning to support the claim that reflex arcs help organisms avoid serious injury. So looking at this picture, the first thing that we notice is that the stimulus is the sense of pain from the nail puncturing that finger, and the signal travels down the arm to the spinal cord, and then back out, and then to the muscle, causing the finger to lurch back. And The big thing about this is that the signal never traveled through the brain at any point. And this is going to mean that there are a lot fewer neural connections between synapses and neurons, and this will make the signal go much faster. And another thing is that the response is involuntary. It's not like the definition of a reflex is just something that is innate, hardwired into your brain. So your body just does it uh, without thinking. Like when you touch a hot pan, like your instinct is to lurch your arm back because you feel the pain. It doesn't involve like a conscious decision in the traditional sense. And so why does this help avoid serious injury? Well, the fact that this signal doesn't go to the brain means that the response is very quick, so the chance of serious injury is much reduced. And since the response is involuntary, it means it's hardwired in your brain from the very beginning. You don't have to learn from experience that sticking a nail into your finger is a bad thing, because you instinctively pull your finger back when you feel the pain. Question 7. Part A. Based on the graph, describe a specific method of thermoregulation used by the species of animal. Provide support for your answer using the data. So looking at this graph, you can see that as the temperature in the environment increases, the rate of oxygen consumption increases. So what this basically means is that the body of this animal is more active as the temperature in the environment increases. So this suggests that the animal is cold-blooded because it seems to be very sluggish and active, not using very much oxygen when the temperature is cool, but is a lot more active when the temperature is warm. And so it would regulate its body temperature using factors in the environment. Like when it's hot, it would go outside and bask in the sun to soak up the heat and warm itself, increasing its metabolism. And if it gets too hot, it can go in the water or in the shade or etc. to cool down. On the labeled axis provided below, draw a line to indicate the most likely relationship between body temperature and environmental temperature in the species. So, as we saw in the previous picture, the environmental temperature increases and the metabolism increases. So it is very likely that when the environmental temperature increases, the body temperature is going to increase also, because when you are more active, your muscles are producing a lot more heat. So we're just going to draw a line showing that, with positive slope, showing that when the environmental temperature increases, the body temperature increases. 8. A research team has genetically engineered a strain of fruit flies to eliminate errors during DNA replication. The team claims that this will eliminate genetic variation in the engineered flies. A second research team claims that eliminating errors during DNA replication will not entirely eliminate genetic variation in the engineered flies. Part A. Provide one piece of evidence that would indicate new genetic variation has occurred in the engineered flies. Part B. Describe one mechanism that could lead to genetic variation in the engineered strain of flies. And Part C. Describe how genetic variation in a population contributes to the process of evolution in the population. So if there is new genetic variation, then the DNA sequences in these flies will likely be different from their predecessors. There's going to be a new genotype of many of these flies, and we can also say that this may lead to changes in phenotype, although it often does not. And describe one mechanism that could lead to genetic variation in the engineered strain of flies. So even though we've eliminated the mutations that occur due to mistakes made during replication, this does not get rid of the mutations altogether, as there's still other things that can cause mutations, like radiation or chemicals and stuff like that. Or you can, or another thing that's very important is that even though is that genetic variation doesn't just arise from random mutations. A lot of it is caused by sexual reproduction, which involves the recombination of alleles, and this may create a new genetic variation in our population. And finally, describe how genetic variation in the population contributes to the process of evolution in the population. Well, so when you have many different phenotypes, then the ones that are working best with the environment and ensure the best survival, the best fitness for that species are going to be selected for, and the ones that don't ensure a good fitness will be selected against. And if you don't have that diversity, that constant, testing out of new genotypes, then you're not going to have natural selection. You're not going to have evolution because the population isn't really going to be changing. Thank you for watching this video, and please subscribe for some more AP biology content.